Hello, everybody. Welcome. Hello. Arms disappear. Great. Hello, hello. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. Hello, welcome, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just going to have a couple of minutes while everyone's coming in. Say hello. Let us know where you're calling in from. I'm just playing the Music Victoria Mix Series. It's on the website if you want to check it out. Very own Danielle. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. Have a couple of minutes while everyone's coming in. Say hello. Say hello. Yeah. Friday. Hello to all the Music Victoria team. I can see a few names in the chat. Hello, everyone. Hi, 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 hi. A little bit about me. I upgraded my studio last night, so I've got all new tech, so this is all fun for me. Computers and stuff. So. Hello, Dale.
Hey, go on.
Well, good. I'm great. How are you this morning?
Good. Maybe just a reminder to people on the call, just mute yourself if you're not speaking. It's a little bit of noise coming through.
Yep. We've got a high amount of numbers coming into this session today. So please, if you could all just mute your microphones, that would be great. It's a great mix, Danielle. Fantastic. All right. Okay, I think that's about enough time while everyone's sort of in at the moment. More people are coming through, but we'll just admit them as they come through. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Where to From Here, an information session where we are going to answer all of your questions around the roadmap. There's not a lot in discussion around sort of what that means for sort of the music industry, the hospitality industry, and we thought we'd just take the opportunity to hear your voices and hear your questions and address your concerns, because COVID sucks. It really sucks, and we need to talk about these sort of things because we want to know what you're feeling, and we want to give you answers as well. So before we start things, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, of which lands we are on. Sovereignty has never been ceded. My name is Kiwat Cannell. I'm a proud Eastern Torres Strait Islander man from the islands of Ugar and Errob in the Eastern Torres Strait. I am the project coordinator with Music Victoria. And today joining me is a very special guest. She is our amazing CEO. She's always advocating for us. She's out there just absolutely being a champion for all of us every day. You should see the amount of work she does behind the scenes. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for one and only Simone Shingle.
Kiwat, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I know these are trying times, and I guess we just want to share what we're doing behind the scenes and give you the chance to ask any questions. And if we can't answer them today, then we'll definitely take them on notice and get to the bottom of it for you. So, as you would realize, you're here. We have maybe 3 weeks ago now, the Victorian government produced the Victorian Road Map. Now, the Victorian Road Map has 4 phases, titled Phase A, B, C, and D. And this is developed to align with the national plan for reopening. In metropolitan Melbourne at the moment, we're still in Phase A. Obviously, we're in lockdown. Regional Victoria is in Phase B. Now, Metro and Regional Victoria will all come together when we get to Phase C. I'm also going to just try and take this really slow. Keep putting your chats in the keep putting your comments in the chat as we go. I didn't want to assume any knowledge as well, so some of you might have dived in quite deeply to the roadmap and others haven't. So I just wanted to make it equitable for all. So we'll start at the base, and I'm also working from home, as you all are, with 2 young children who have just entered. You good, guys?
Hi, Mum. Making birthday party.
Great.
Hi.
Okay, you got to go now.
What are you doing?
So the first stage, other than lockdown, will see us move when we hit 70% of 16 and plus vaccinated. Now, this was originally targeted to be reached on the 26th of October. In conversations with government yesterday, they thought it could be as soon as Thursday next week. But based on media conferences, it could be even sooner than that. So at 70%, we start to open up. The big thing to note is that all this opening up is only for fully vaccinated. It's required, so studios, entertainment venues and hospitality are open, but it's outdoor only. It's a density quotient 4, which means that you can have 1 person every 4 square meters.
No, you don't.
And the maximum capacity is 50. Also worth noting, seated service only. Karaoke and nightclubs, closed. So obviously this phase does very, very little for live music in the state. When we hit 80% of 16 plus vaccinated, which is expected, sorry, not the 5th of October, expected to be the 5th of November, if not earlier, we then open up for indoor trading as well. So again, we still need everyone who's there to be fully vaccinated. If you're operating outdoors, you can actually increase to a DQ2. So that's 1 person every 2 square meters and a maximum capacity of 500. But you can only have the 500 if you've got enough space to do that, allowing 1 person every 2 square meters. When we're indoors, we've got density quotient of 1 person per 4 square meters. And this is the first time we've been allowed indoors. And we've got a maximum capacity of 150. The biggest problem we see with this is that to actually get 150 people in a venue, you need to be the size of the forum. And 150 people in the forum is not a great vibe. So again, we see this as very little live music is possible. This is probably the setting for, November, December. And this is why we will see lots of outdoor activations, because it's only in outdoors that we've got anything that's even close to viable for live music. In terms of hospitality, karaoke and nightclubs, it's seated service only, which is a bit of a joke because no one goes to nightclubs to sit down. So also acknowledging that while that is provided for, if people want to pivot, it's not really the ultimate goal. So after we get to those 2, what happens beyond? Now, the most disappointing part about the roadmap is that essentially we're not on it. Our multi-billion-dollar industry has been left off, and that's extremely disappointing. But we are continuing to work with the health department and the government, and this is where we know that gradually the DQ will reduce and gradually the total capacities will increase. One thing we've advocated to be brought in is actually the removal of the DQ requirement and having an option of a percentage of capacity. So some parts in the roadmap might say 25% capacity or 50% capacity or 75% capacity. And that definitely works in favour
Maybe
of
don't open that, please, if it's
live music. There's also the potential for the introduction of exemptions. Previous to this lockdown, we had the public events framework, which is for ultimately some of those bigger events, but anyone with the capacity to go through that long, arduous, painful process is welcome. But it's basically implementing other risk mitigation strategies that make it viable to open. And our argument all along has been, actually, we're a really regulated industry. We've got great relationships with police and liquor licensing and all the rest. So we do know what we're doing. People joke that we could have done the rollout of the vaccination for the government and we'd be much further along. And in terms of, again, I've put up there that the access is only for fully vaccinated people. Up until recently, we had no end in sight. New South Wales had given a deadline of the 1st of December when vaccinated and unvaccinated could mingle. But for us, it looks like the Premier's most recent statement has said that it'll be in place for the next 3 to 4 months. Let me just get to the next page. So that's where we're at in terms of the roadmap. Really disappointing that we're not on it. Really disappointing that, you know, there is no mapped future out that's publicly available. When the roadmap was announced, we, along with our creative industries colleagues, were invited to a meeting with the government where they presented the roadmap to us and, you know, got our feedback, where we asserted quite strongly that we're not on it and it's really disappointing. And from that followed a live music only roundtable with Minister Pearson on Thursday, the 7th of October, so last week. And at that meeting, we were quite specific and we called for 3 things: a roadmap that returns our industry back to 100% operating capacity. We need our own, basically, and we need to know what the future holds for us, particularly because the nature of our business is that we need time to rehearse and plan before we can hit the ground running. We also mentioned that we need to be consulted in the development and ongoing implementation of the roadmap. There's been quite a few errors along the way. This is kind of policy that's being made on the fly, and, you know, they announce one thing and then it gets developed behind the scenes and presented to us as law the next day. But it's just meant that there's been ultimately mistakes along the way that we think should be avoided. Also, in terms of its requirements, the requirement for only allowing mandated vaccinated people in being mandated, we need help to implement that. And in short, we just want to be up and working again. And I think it's even just good for our mental health. So we've been pushing to try and get rehearsals going. They've just recently gotten up for major theatre shows. So we hope that we're the next cab off the rank in terms of that. And also advocating that we want to be back in a studio. So if we can have even just 2 people to do some recording, that's still a step and still gets our people making art like they should be. So I want to go backwards. I want to go forwards. The next thing we called for was ongoing scaled financial support until we have those capacities back at 100%. So we've really been arguing. I only started in March, and this has been all of my job, which is noting that financial support should not be based on ANZIC codes. That's not how our industry works. And we also can't require GST registration. We don't make enough in our industry to make that a requirement. So you've got to make spaces for that. The suppliers grants that were available earlier, that was exactly that fight, to try and find a way to get people support who are not GST registered. We've also provided government with other alternatives in terms of, you know, if you've got a Music Victoria membership, give them some money. If you know, can prove based on 2019 figures, you know, there's got to be a way that we can define who requires this support and who doesn't. And just noting that our recovery takes so much longer because of these limits on capacities. The final thing we called for was a bit bigger, and it was a reason for hope. So actually it was the electronic music conference people that did a survey of their members and found that the number 2 problem was that people were just giving up, like they'd totally lost hope, and it's absolutely understandable. So we wanted the government to really commit to supporting the long-term recovery. We've had our inspiration and passion sapped and also taken advantage of, I would say, over the past 2 years, and that so much progress that we were making has
come undone and gone backwards, especially in terms of, our international relationships, even in terms of gender equity and who's presented on stage. If it comes down to survival and who's going to sell the most beer, then that's how people are curating their events. We've also called on the government to inspire our artists and invest in their creative development, and ultimately make participation in our industry a worthwhile pursuit and a sustainable career. So that's about respecting and bringing back the skills and talent that we may have lost, and also calling for some minimum wages. Since that meeting, I have had the pleasure of being called by Danny Pearson on a daily basis. So that just goes to show that Music Vic really does have quite a good relationship with government. And I guess we just try and feed information left, right, and centre to tell them what's a good idea, what's not a good idea, where the pressure points are, and what they need to address. So after that roundtable, the minister committed $5 million to the Victorian creative industries, and that's particularly for independents and micro businesses through the Sustaining Creators Workers Program. And I haven't checked Creative Victoria's website just yet, but the details of that are due to be announced potentially even today. They also announced this major event at the Sydney Myer Music Bowl on the 30th of October. We know that this doesn't solve all the problems, but there are just steps in the right direction, and we welcome them, and we'll keep addressing the gaps, I guess. On to the next one. I think it's also worth noting that lots of the challenges that we're presented with actually sit at a federal level in terms of wage subsidies or welfare support. So we've really been working with our colleagues. Music Victoria is part of the Australian Music Industry Network, known as AMIN, but we've also worked with a whole suite of other peak bodies who operate at a federal level to advocate for a $100 million package for our industry that would kick off in December and go through to June next year, because we think that's how long these challenges are going to be with us for. It is a proposal to the federal government. We've also engaged a lobbyist. So this is kind of how hard we're going. It's not something the industry's ever done before, but we know that that's how much pain we're in. So the aim of this package would be to retain the core skills and capacity and stabilize our companies and industry. We've provided them with a whole bunch of modeling and ideas, but basically think of like the aviation package, something that's targeted to us because of the challenges. There's also, the government never takes exactly what you present. They'll always try and make it their own. But it's some kind of extension of the Arts Sustainability Fund, which is currently just for not-for-profits, but to make that available to the commercial entertainment sector. I'll move, now we're on to questions.
All right, question time. All right, let's see, we have a question from Judith. How do we check the double vaxxed efficiently?
Okay, double vaccination will be on the Services Victoria app. I might just stop sharing and change my background to be nothing. And I will. Okay, so Services Victoria app. Hold on, go again. Basically, the government's going to provide a whole lot of education around this. Early next week is the plan. We've reported to them that we need a big push to communicate these requirements to the community, basically, in general. They are running trials in regional Victoria at the moment where they're testing out all this technology and all the systems. But essentially, in the Services Victoria app, open it up there, down the bottom here, or you can check in. I think I took screenshots of this. Maybe that's a better way to show it. Okay, so I checked in down the bottom, and it's called True Play Collective. And I said, yes, I'd like to check in there. And then where you have the tick, that's your normal check-in process. Now on the Services Victoria app, down the bottom here, that's my vaccination, that green stripe. So this is what people will come and show you at the door, but there will be training provided that details that. The government has let us know that the download rate of the Services Victoria app is huge and well ahead of schedule, even though it's only just been announced and it's only just been implemented in regional Victoria. There are also opportunities for people who don't have smartphones to bring pieces of paper, etc. They're also trying to work through ways for people to prove that they are exempt from getting a vaccination. So there's lots of details being worked through, but we will be providing kind of cheat sheets that kind of can educate our sector on those requirements. Next.
Yeah, next question we've got from Anna. Do we know what's going to happen if numbers go up again after Melbourne Cup? Has anything been said about the possibility of pushing back, opening up entertainment and arts if the numbers go up?
There's never anything official. The government, however, is pretty committed to continuing to forge ahead. The challenge will come when it's based on hospitalizations, but we have actually already seen, while our numbers are going up, the hospitalizations aren't going up at the same rate that they were. So they call that decoupling. So yes, lots of people ultimately can get COVID, but if the people who get it are vaccinated, the likelihood of ending up in hospital is reduced, and that's the biggest hurdle for the sector. So it should be fine if we reach our targets.
Cool. Thank you.
But never say never.
Say never. Next up is from Victor. Has anything been said about gigs with dance floor and capacities?
So we try not to draw attention to some of these types of things. Ultimately, we just simply reported back to the government when it did have the definitions around dance floors. We said, that's impossible to police. You know, who's going to define what is dancing? Is it swaying? Or, you know, also when people did try and implement dance floors and put barriers around them, you know, then there's just a squash group of people waiting to get on the dance floor just outside the dance floor. So ultimately, we've just pushed back and said that's not implementable to Vic Health. They have separated out nightclubs, potentially because of that reason in the roadmap. But again, advocating for general admission standing events broadly is our job. And you don't really want to be specified in a restricted activity directive because that means they're worried about you. So the more general it can be, ideally, the more hope we have of opening sooner.
Next up is from Zulia. Do you have any details about local councils being able to put outdoor gigs? They seem to be too scared or something.
So again, it will be a outdoor summer activation will absolutely be happening. And in terms of the allowances being made to do that, that's up to local council to pass those, the relevant permits, etc. So that's kind of on a case-by-case basis. Dale, did you have any more to add to that, just in terms of what's required from a local government perspective?
No, not at this stage, other than they'll just be following the state government guidelines, which are still a bit vague at this point.
Yeah, but obviously if your local council is reporting to you that they're not doing anything and they're paranoid, send them to us and we'll try and build those bridges between the state government and local government to get activity happening.
Next up is from Nat. When do you predict it will be safe or a safer bet to tour interstate or head overseas?
The $1 million question. People are touring overseas now. It is something that's possible. You can get exemptions. And I direct you to Sounds Australia, who are doing that work to support people. Ultimately, I think it's got to be a career defining moment or something like that, that if you don't go now, it's lost forever. So there's a few hoops to jump through. It's going to be interesting, but I think because of New South Wales opening up, followed by us, we will see touring around, best guess, maybe, like people are keen. So the biggest challenge will be that it won't be all of Australia. So the NT is going to lock up its borders. So is WA, and they're just going to stay shut for as long as they can. So it's that sort of balance of we're free to move potentially between Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, but not much further. So that's it's a problem because we're a national industry. So until everyone's at the same point as each other in terms of vaccination rates, it's tricky. In terms of official timelines, I think it is at the 5th of November when we start being able to cross borders, at least with New South Wales. But ultimately, it's up to each state to decide who they want. But we have previously, there have been exemptions again. So if you do have a tour offer, get in touch, because there are channels to pursue that. And, whether it's quarantining at home or whether it's rapid antigen testing or, vaccination status, there's always people who manage to come and get through. We want to make that you, essentially.
So I hope that also answers your question there, Chris, around sort of interstate travel you mentioned there. I just want to address Anna's question. Are we going to be allowed to have live music outdoors where food is being served, markets, etc.?
Yes, that's totally fine. That was one time when the government made different rules for serving food and drink. There was a big problem and there was a lot of pushback. So hopefully they don't make that mistake again.
Next question is from Josh. Has there been anything said about mask mandates changing with the roadmap?
Yes, so let me just pull it up. We do have, so at the next phase, we still need masks. At the 5th of November phase, it's generally just masks indoors. Yes. So, yes, we still need to wear masks, at least for a little while to come. And I guess it's a small challenge, but if it gives us more freedom, then that's the sort of balance that the government's willing to take. And it's one of the things that is tricky around alcohol consumption as well, and the reality of whether people are actually wearing them even though they're indoors because they're drinking. But yes, indoors is required. Essentially, it's just seen as a higher risk environment.
We have a question from one of our very own, Fiona. Some music venues I've been working with seem to be able to classify themselves as either an entertainment venue or a hospitality venue. And this has an impact on what capacity they can have. Many venues are both. Do they get to self-classify? Absolutely,
they do. And so this has come up a few times, and I've been told point blank to stop pursuing it, because basically it's how you're trying to operate. If you want people to be standing watching a gig, then you're an entertainment venue. If you are sitting down serving dinner, the general environment in which you're operating is different. So we're really trying to advocate for the entertainment venues. And if you can put your hand on your heart and say that's what you're trying to do, then absolutely you can go ahead and do that. It's not clear cut, but again, we don't want extra rules put on us and defined on us than is necessary. But if people are worried, feel free to direct them to me and I can explain that in detail about how they can pivot or not.
This question's from Paulie. We had to cancel our Sorry Day event with young Indigenous performers earlier this year. Can we now hold it outdoors with a crowd under 50?
For, as in right now, or for Sorry Day next year?
Paulie, is that for Sorry Day this year? Or,
Right now.
Right now?
Yeah.
Not right now, but pretty soon.
Like in a couple of weeks?
Yeah. Maybe next week.
Cool. That's great.
Perfect. All right. So moving down a couple of questions. This one's from Victor. How can they go ahead and we cannot do anything with more than 150 people and have to sit down?
How can who go ahead? Okay, so generally I'm going to assume it's either the Melbourne Cup or it's the Maya Music Bowl event. These events are still trial events. It's about testing the system, testing the technology, but also testing out the modelling to see if we have vaccination rates that are that high, is it going to be okay? Which is kind of the scenario that we brought up before, to go, if someone's there who has COVID and if it spreads, is it going to impact our hospitalizations or not? It's totally frustrating. I get it. It doesn't seem fair. It's a similar argument around only being allowed 30 people in your house for Christmas. The health department has very interesting views on some of this stuff, but their experience shows that community transmission happens in households because people, maybe aren't being watched as much as they are at a gig. And so they're not wearing masks and they're intermingling and they're in an enclosed space. So that does present a higher risk to catching. Absolutely. You can't check into a house. You can at my house just because I set that system up. But there's different strategies. We had a similar argument around the AFL and why they could have bigger numbers than music could. And when it came down to it, it was because of the CCTV footage, and all the cameras they had on site and all the different entrances compared to one entrance. Our argument then went to, yes, but all those same people catch the train. So we started to see some traction when we presented that case. There's also some arguments coming from health that are around total movement of people. So it's not even that it is specific or equitable. It's that they're choosing one thing over another to ultimately limit people's movement around the state. So people going back to work, why is it a problem to have one person in an office by themselves is kind of one point of an argument, but they don't want all of the state sending one person into the office because that would see a lot more movement of people, if that starts to give you an understanding.
Thank you. Another question from Zulia. Is our government paying any attention to how things are being reopened in Europe and North America?
Yes, there is also a really good session coming up next week. I think it's next week, which is looking, again, the electronic music conference people are putting together some of those internationals to talk about how COVID spreads in air in different avenues, and I'm sending our health department to that, as are other states and territories, just to get an understanding. We forward on a lot of that research where it suits us, but also sometimes it doesn't work in our favor and actually proves their point. So yes, you have to take the good with the bad when you're looking internationally. I think we probably look to New South Wales more than anywhere else. So earlier in the pandemic, South Australia was opening up at a faster rate than we were and doing 3 people per 4 square meters. And we kind of pitched that to our health department. And essentially they just didn't buy it because that health directive was issued by the police, not the health department. So even, the people making decisions will affect the credibility of information that our government and health department will take on. Just on that point, I think Right now, we are governed by the Chief Health Officer. So the political game is a very different one than anyone's probably ever played before. What will happen, though, is the Chief Health Officer will no longer be, the ultimate decision maker, and it will shift as we begin to open up. So it starts to become more of an economic conversation about what they can support and what they can sustain rather than a health one. That's been flagged, even giving Minister Foley, the health minister, more power and taking that away from the Chief Health Officer, and again back just to the Premier. And that is exactly what's happened in New South Wales. So they are very economy focused rather than health focused at this point in time.
Thank you. Got a question from Judith. Exemptions, are these applied for exemptions, are these applied for event by event / venue by venue, or is Music Victoria doing this for the industry?
No, so it doesn't exist officially right now, but they put that in the roadmap that there would be a vehicle to pursue exemptions. There's previously been the public events framework, which was for events over 1,000. And these are because the restricted activity directions and all the roadmaps that we see capture most of what we want to do in life, but there's limits on them. So if you want to run an event over 1,000 people, that's not many people in the state, but it's absolutely our industry. You go and have that conversation with health to say, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to make it safe. And they say, yay or nay, basically. So that is being done for the My Music Bowl situation, and it is being done for the Melbourne Cup situation. And so again, we anticipate that that'll happen for events over 1,000. Previously, it was just for events, but when it was in place, we argued for it to be for venues as well, allowing them to get increased capacities. So the Forum, I know, got one, the Croxton got one, and they got them based on venue. So they applied once and they got it for every activity that was going to happen in their venue. Furthermore,
I've got a follow-up to Zulia's question from Peter. Can Music Victoria contact local councils to advise, reassure, educate them?
Yes, absolutely.
Straight to the point. I like it. Cool. And we do have another question from Paulie. Can we do home studio recording with producer and one musician, both vaxxed and wearing masks?
No, at this point in time, but that's kind of the next step, and that's the easiest win that we see in the near future, is to get small numbers of people back working. The challenge is defining the space. Often there's challenges around other particularly venues as opposed to one that you've set up in your house. It depends on whether there's a separate entrance. We had similar concerns when people wanted to rehearse in their garage, and it was like, no one's allowed to your home, but you can have people do work. So it's like, if you work from home, is this allowable? How many people? So right now, no, but we would hope that there is movement soon. On allowing a few people to do recordings, just like, so the broadcasting, by way of example, was only for religious purposes. And in the most recent restricted activity directions, we've got that included for creative industries so that we can now do broadcasts with up to 5 people at a dedicated venue, though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Paul. Yeah, go ahead, Paulie.
I'm just saying thanks for that info, and Music Victoria will let us know, I suppose, as soon as you hear, you'll pass it on to the rest of us, eh?
Absolutely. That's our job. I'd just maybe reiterate that if you're not a member of Music Victoria, please do sign up. We have a free option, so there should be no barrier. And that's the best way to get the hot off the press info as it comes to hand, just to enable us to get messages out to many people quickly.
Cool.
We have free memberships.
Yeah.
Setting that into the chat now. I have a few questions here. Another one from Anna. Not entirely related, but have they said anything about singing lessons being allowed to go back to in person?
No, but I can follow that one up for you. Huge challenges, yes, around singing, but hopefully with I know choirs are a major area of concern, but singing lessons should be more straightforward. So maybe I'll just take a note of that one.
Another one from Judith. So if we plan a festival in April for over 1,000, should we apply now?
You can't apply now. There is no system to apply now, but you can absolutely get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with the right people, but the framework just isn't operating or in existence at this point in time. I'm also tempted to think that by April, we're definitely past a lot of the pain points. So we are expecting, or at least we were expecting, hospitalizations to peak in December, and the associated fatalities in January. So having gotten past that, I think we'll be in a very different place. And even with the 3 or 4 month vaccine mandate, we might be starting to wean ourselves off that by that point in time.
Another question from Zulia. What's the definition of a creative studio?
Isn't one. A space that's not in your house, or it can be in your house if it has a separate entrance. But again, we're trying not to ask for this much detail because we think it will cause more problems than solutions, but we understand that that's nerve-wracking for people who are just trying to do the right thing. Ultimately, all these things come down to common sense, and people can tell when you're pushing the boundaries. But it's a fine line. But no, sorry, there is no official definition.
This question comes from Holly. Can bands rehearse as part of pre-production for film performances?
No, at this point in time. And we experienced that ourselves when we've just done our own live stream for the awards. But again, this is the sort of conversation we're having now that major theatre performances have got that rehearsal exemption, that we hope to be next off the rank with that sort of approval. The broadcast is for the broadcast purposes only.
This one comes from Josh. So at this stage, are recording studios able to resume taking fully vaccinated clients from November 6th stage?
Yes.
I know that's a problem for some musicians, is that they want to get back into the studios, and like having the ability to sort of broadcast live from the venue is a good way to sort of get yourself back.
Yeah, I guess we just want it sooner rather than later, and to not be delayed so much, because every hour I think causes more and more pain.
Yeah, absolutely. This one is from Peter. A big concern also is doing music presentations or teaching at schools. Currently, external presenters and teachers are still banned. This is a big source of income for many of us musos. I think that's more exciting. Yeah, that's yeah.
It's just absolutely a good point, and getting the full ecosystem of music and how we sustain careers in music up and running again is vitally important. I know that schools have massive challenges at the moment in terms of actually getting even kids on site. I have a kid in school who's going to go back 3 days a week. It's like, okay, whatever. Is MV working? Sorry, I maybe will stop reading the questions as they pop up. It's not our number one priority, to be perfectly honest, but it is on the radar. I guess our advocacy work, we represent the whole of music in this state, and the different priorities and pressure points and easy wins, I guess, is where we pivot between, on a day-to-day basis. Previously, our focus was on indoor venues because of the limitations that the density restrictions place on them and the role they play in the ecology. Then when we thought the department was no longer worried about that because of Delta, indoor and outdoor were similar risk levels, we then focused on festivals because it was all about the total number of people. So in theory, having 300 people in a venue wasn't as bad as having 1,000 people at a festival outdoors. So we shifted there. And now that we know that the federal support payments are going to stop, independents are our biggest priority right now. So it does change based on the different environments in which we're working. And given how many hurdles there are to getting kids back into school already, we know that that's a longer road for us, is probably the best I can share with you.
Is the COVID disaster payment staying around for sole traders after 80% vax?
No, as the federal government has announced, it will be removed, and that's why we're pushing on this federal advocacy piece with a lobbyist to go, well, that's fine for most of the world, but not our industry, because we're not up and running again, and we are still shut.
Another question. Local
and
tour.
Sorry. Just also, so we've also pursued that with the state government, and while they won't provide wage subsidies, or don't believe it's their job as a state, they will be looking at other funding grant opportunities for those people who are currently on the disaster payment, because essentially they also forwarded people who are micro businesses to claim that as individuals. So there is a section that is still absolutely business, even if you're an individual sole trader, that they need to support.
A question from Josh again. Local tours by international artists are being advertised for as early as April next year. Is this a reasonable expectation for when travel into Australia and New Zealand can resume?
Yeah, so from phase D, we do have international travel. I guess it's just about what the reality of that is. Very costly in terms of where people are coming from. Will be limited. What vaccines are approved, because if you got vaccinated overseas, they have different ones than we approve here. Whether you can afford to do quarantine and where that quarantine takes place. But there are people doing amazing things. It's also money. So if you have the capacity to take those risks, yes, it is possible. Absolutely.
And another question from Anna. Are they going to only give that support for people who are GST registered? I think that's...
I'm not sure which support exactly you're speaking of. The one I mentioned that they've just announced, the 5 million, is not it's not through Business Victoria. It's through the creative industries and Creative Victoria. So because it's a grant, GST doesn't matter. It's only the money that comes through Business Victoria's department, which is a different minister, that has that hurdle on it. And it's really just a problem of trying to solve the problem as quickly as possible, and making policy on the fly. And the easiest way they saw to do that was to make it GST registered. We did, though, do the work to go, how many musicians are registered with an ABN that don't have GST registration, and we did those figures, and unfortunately it was just ginormous, which might be good or might be bad, but it was such a large number that they couldn't take the risk that all of those were actively engaged in pursuing music in the past year or something. So we had to find alternative measures to distribute that money, which is how the supplier grants came about for the cancellations for those who weren't registered for GST.
Might take a couple of questions that were submitted before we came into the session.
Yep.
One of which was why are music venues the focus on the recovery when they have a history of exploiting music workers for years, and the majority of people in the music industry are sole traders?
So they're not, would be my first answer. That might be what it seems like. The venues do have their own Save Our Scene group who are quite active and engaged and motivated. So good on them. Politics has multi angles to it and multiple different roles that people play. I feel like I just have a lot of conversations with a lot of different people to try and drive home the same message and to connect the dots. I don't know that it's always the public facing ones that get it across the line. And that's why we've engaged a lobbyist at a federal level. It's kind of gross, but it works because people are friends with people who make decisions, who trust each other. Yeah, that's the game we're in. At one point it was definitely the venues that were in a particular bind because we'd organised the federal support and the venues were in limbo because they weren't getting any support from like licensed hospitality. But again, now that they have that ongoing support, Music Victoria's priority has shifted and will continue to shift as the landscape changes and as announcements are made to support what's necessary at that point in time. Particularly, as I said, we know that this federal government support is ending, so we really need that gap to be filled urgently.
All right, and I think we got a question from another one from Zulia. She says, "Thank you for all the work you're doing. So, do you think the government is becoming more aware of the difficult situation with music in general?"
Federally, I'm not convinced, but we're trying. At a state level, I think we have so many people on side internally fighting really, really hard for us. I know, though, that we are living in a pandemic and there are lots of people asking for lots of things at the moment. For a while there, I think we were further down the list, obviously, because, the first and foremost priority is people's health and the hospitals and making sure that they can be supported throughout. But I think it's working when the politicians repeat what I've said to them back to me. I'm like, oh, okay, you get it now. So just how DQ doesn't equate to, like, DQ2 is not 50%, it's actually 30% just because of the available space and we're not allowed to count the stage or backstage or, I do think we need to increase the pressure. It's not just a creative industries problem. We need to argue on an economic front as well as a mental health front, as well as the role we play in building community and celebration and joy and connecting people after months of isolation. So that it does require us to put pressure on ministers which maybe we didn't have a relationship with before. Before we end, I will all give you a call to action that you can help to support us in this work. But yeah, essentially, yes, things are being taken up to cabinet, asking for lots and lots of money. But there's a lot of people that have a say in whether those decisions and those initiatives get up and get supported. So we just need to keep the pressure on. And also in terms of advocacy, there's different roles that people play. So Music Victoria will always pursue the official channels first. We write submissions, we, try and keep the door open to have conversations with people so that they do feel they can come to us for information and we can give that to them honestly and with research and with rigor. But then there is also, I think it's called the rebel role, which is quite suitable, which is people who can just get quite public and yell and scream, and we all just need to work together. So I know that Save Our Scene and I talk quite a bit to go, you're focused on venues, I'm not, but we're all working together. So we're all still saying the same thing. We just have slight different tweaks to it because I think it's important we don't undo each other's work, but we just amplify each other's work.
All right. Question from our very own Danielle. Will outdoor music events require separation of crowds similar to the pod system Sydney Myer Music Bowl have across this summer?
I do think there will be a limit on the total number of people in any one location. So they've already announced at the Melbourne Cup that the limit will be 2,500 people mixing rather than all 10,000 mixing. So yes, but whether it needs to be as small as the pods at the Music Bowl, which were like 6 or 10 or something, I don't think it needs to be that small a group. I know other events that I've been talking to, there's one in November, are looking at, just doing tables or circles of 10. It's not officially barricaded between the groups, but it's just another risk mitigation strategy to come with your friends, stick in your group and go from there. So,
and I think this question kind of follows on from what you're saying. It's very curious this is from Anna. Very curious. The attitude on the ground is that our country values sport above music. Is this obvious in the various meetings that you can have?
Yep. I mean, I think of sport in our country as like the religion in other countries. But also, I mean, that conversation can go on forever. I've been part of those conversations. We always need to copy what sport does to get a better result. You can't bet on music. You can gamble with sport. I don't know if that plays a part in it. I think, the value of music, or even more broadly of arts and creativity, is there. It's just not widely shouted about, I guess. But there's a lot of work. I'd point you to a new approach. They're a research body that's independent, that's been set up, that has done a lot of research in this space to kind of go, okay, what's it going to take? And even what terminology do we use to get people to understand and to value our work? But a lot of this whole pandemic has been education to the government on how our industry works. So it's not just fighting for money and support, but it's also explaining why something will or won't work along the way. So I think we'll come out the other side with a better understanding, which hopefully will lead to a bit more valuing.
All right. Well, I think we've got a few more questions left. This one's from Zulia. How can musicians help to increase this pressure on government?
I'll come to that before we end, but I'll hold that thought. Next.
Yep. And this is from Victor. He's like, I'm sorry, I arrived a little late and I think I lost part of the meeting. If a venue I work with has a large outdoor area, do people have to sit down if there is music for events after we hit the 80%? Also, thanks for your work and this meeting.
If it's outdoors and you're putting on a gig, you can claim that you're an entertainment venue. So you don't need to sit down officially. It's how you want to present that event. So I would say standing would be fine, but I'm happy to talk to your venue owner and provide more navigation, because that is the grey area that lots of venues are struggling with, because they are licensed hospitality venues. Basically, it's pick whichever one works best for you, while being able to put your hand on your heart and say that's what you're doing.
Okay. Well, I think Anna mentioned maybe we could start a bet on which drummer will do the longest solo. Maybe that will get more people involved instead of sport. All right.
I'm just gonna share again.
Yes.
So we've kind of already answered that we shift what we prioritize, just based on the environment in which we find ourselves. I would say, though, that we are in constant communication with MEAA and Musicians Australia, and have backed their call for a minimum wage for musicians. So yes, music workers, musicians, always part of it. And also just trying to bring it back to the fact that without the musicians, there is no other industry. So we need to focus on the creators, hence our calls to action that I mentioned. How are we expected to survive once disaster relief is gone? You're not. And that's why we're arguing so hard that there is something in its place, whether that's from the feds, which is where it should come from, or whether there's a way to fill that gap in other ways through the state and funding rounds, activations, etc. Music venues, we've answered that one. Clear rules, yes, not yet. But it's coming and we're fighting very hard to make it sooner rather than later. Travel limitations. I know that the 25-kilometre comes into play, but essentially when we're allowed to start working, you can travel as far as you need to for permitted purposes. So if you're working, you're allowed. It's the problem is the audiences can't travel quite as far as you can. Are vaccinations mandatory? Yes, in some settings, and it looks like they will be required by people attending events and attending gigs. There is grey area around whether our performers as contractors are required. At the moment, if you're an authorised worker, you would be. So if you're trying to do a broadcast, everyone needs to be vaccinated to participate in that. But also we anticipate that this will only be around for 3 to 4 months. And the other thing is, I know there's kind of a bigger conversation happening as well about the government's power in this space. Music Victoria actually welcomes the government making vaccines mandatory. It's not our position, but what it does is it takes the pressure off all of our individuals to make that decision. So otherwise it would be a venue or the festival deciding whether they're going to make that their rule or not. And that's just so fraught and so challenging. So actually the government taking this step and making it mandatory is one we welcome, as long as there is a time limit on it. And now that they've shared that with us, that is useful. We've also got our own legal advice, and we have explored the power that government has, I guess, in this space. And we've been told officially that it does not interfere with human rights or discrimination laws. And essentially the reason it doesn't is because it's not a protected attribute, vaccination status, but also because the public health orders are limited in nature. So this mandatory vaccination is not forever. If it was forever, then it becomes a human rights issue. But while it's just to mitigate against the risk of, hospital systems collapsing and, fatalities, that's allowed and allowable. But I understand it may be contentious, and we are working with the government to, again, make that not our responsibility to be the frontline workers to have those conversations. They need to step in and say, this is what's required in society. What are the trials all about? Yeah, so there are some trials underway at the moment in regional Victoria, and the one for the Melbourne Cup and Maya Music Bowl, which are about testing out the systems, both technology as well as the health implications of the result. And also, we've got mandatory vaccinations. So is there pushback? How do people feel on the front door? Does it work? How do you say yes? How do you say no? So just trying to nut out some of those challenges before that comes into effect. The trials also give people higher capacities. So they're basically 2 weeks ahead of where we are now. So instead of 20 people, I think they could have 30 people. It's not really viable for our businesses in the industry we work in to open under these sorts of restrictions, but it is a necessary step. What can I do? This is what some people are asking. Yep. So I do have a call to action. I want to just say, though, if you don't have capacity, if you're just over it all, just take a rest. This isn't your job. This is my job, and this is what I do every day, but it does help. So if you are looking for a way to add your voice and you want to feel a bit more powerful and in power of your future, I'd encourage you to figure out who your local Victorian member is. And I've put the website there. And I would write to them, send them an email, tell them your story, tell them what you're worried about, tell them that the feds have removed the support you're on, tell them that you've been out of work, tell them how your mental health's going. Like, we really need these stories to be heard. And the more people we have receiving this information, talking about this stuff, that's how it gets higher up on the government's agenda. And then I'd also, bring it back to how they can fix it, and just reiterate our 3 demands, which are the industry roadmap, financial support until we are back at 100%, and a future to try and find a way that we can recover from 2 years of non-activity or painful activity. And a similar thing on the federal level is to find your local federal member, to write to them, and again, to tell your story. I don't want to re-traumatize people, I guess, so only do this if you have capacity. But when we send people, lists of gigs that have been cancelled, it starts to become really powerful. You go, this is everything that was on the agenda for 2021, which we thought was going to be so much better than 2020. And then just crossing out lines through it does start to sink in and have an effect. So yeah, if you have capacity, I'd encourage you to tell your story. And again, just to reiterate that our support, our call of the feds is that we need a targeted industry package valued at $100 million. Yeah. Do I have another slide? I do. The end.
The end.
I'm going to stop sharing though and just check if there's any other questions.
One question here from a question from Penny. So currently musicians do not have to be vaccinated to perform at a venue when we open on November 5th?
Unclear, to be perfectly honest. I think if you want to be safe, I would be vaccinated, and I'm not the government. But I'm just saying that because each individual venue may interpret that differently. So if the kind of feeling is, if you need to be vaccinated to be employed at the venue and you need to be vaccinated to enter the venue as a punter or, a gig goer, audience member, then it would not make common sense for the performer to be unvaccinated. But that's a grey area that they're interrogating at the moment. But I wouldn't count on it, is my sense. Like, the government is working through how to make this as clear as possible. And was there something about something that went down mid-meeting that I missed? And Bree, maybe we should introduce Bree as well.
Yes.
Yes, sorry, I interrupted this amazing chat because looks like red zone's been downgraded, so people can come in from New South Wales. I think if they've got a jab, if they don't, it looks like they need a quarantine. So there's a little.
I was just going to say they also need to return a negative test 72 hours before they travel into the state.
Yeah. Small.
Was there also something around density? Sorry, was there also something around density quotients being taken back as well? Because I haven't seen it, but I heard there may have been something around the density quotients in New South Wales being relaxed from November 1, I think it was.
Oh, right. That's happened today, has it?
Yeah, I'm unsure. I think it might have just been announced with those other collection of announcements about the red zone, but I'm not entirely sure.
Need to go on to this is what happens when you avoid the news. You miss everything. Have to log on to ABC and get our Friday update. But sorry, not to hijack Simone's amazing Q&A. I am the new clinician / consultant / it's a wanky version of saying I'm here to have a chat if anyone needs wellbeing support. So we'll get some information up on the website. I'll be around specifically for Music Victoria members until June next year, roughly, hopefully beyond. But basically just acknowledging everything we've chatted about today, an incredible amount of resilience for you all to have to lean on. Understandably, it's eroding quite a bit now. So if you need to have a chat, have a yarn, please reach out to me. I'll pop my email in the chat here as well. I can support business owners, I can support musicians, can support anyone really if you just need to get some stuff off your chest. Our service also has financial counsellors and small business wellbeing advisors. So there's a couple of things that we can link you up with as well if you have more pragmatic things that need to be addressed outside of your mental health. But I just want to say g'day, and I won't keep you too long because we're probably all keen to see what's happening with the state border, but thanks for letting me jump in.
And yeah, as you can see, things move very quickly. So my favorite pastime is to tune into the press conferences daily to see if they confirm or deny what I think is going to happen. So yeah, please just check your emails, I guess, is the best thing. If you don't want to be bombarded with media calls for the rest of your life. I'm happy to take a hit for the team, and I will report back on any big wins that we have in that space. But yeah, the more stories that we can get out there that provide solutions. I think we need to be careful about, yeah, we know it's horrific. Do you know what I mean? We just want to find a way to the other side. We need to find a way out of this, and we need to be working again and doing what we love. So that's where we're trying to get to. And yeah, I think someone put in the chat, yeah, being vaccinated is kind of the remit at the moment, whether it's a government initiative or whether it's an independent business initiative. I know that we recently did some stuff with Channel 9, and not only did they want us to be vaccinated or partially vaccinated, but they wanted a test before we would talk to them outside. So, you know, different levels of restriction based on different people's risk appetite. Look at that. We're early. Any more questions?
Any more questions at all? Let's see. Yes, I think we've got one from Chris regarding vax and shows. Not a single tour being spoken about right now that I'm involved with or know of is taking non-vax crew or musos on the road. Do with that what you will. Thanks, Chris. Zulia asked if I understand correctly, in 3 to 4 months, vaccinations won't be mandatory. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what we anticipate. It won't be, we anticipate that it will no longer be government mandated, but then it may fall to individual venues, festivals, etc., as part of their risk mitigation strategy. Can we perform interstate if borders are open? Sure. And even when borders were closed, in theory, you could. It's just what the requirements are around vaccination status, a clear test, etc. A standard set, can we provide a standard set of words for festival event websites? Yes, we're absolutely working on that. And the one thing we feel that our industry has a better capacity to do, at least in some situations, is that we engage with our audiences much before they turn up at the door often. So in a lot of scenarios with ticketed events, say you can engage with people, and also promotion is what we do. So it's like you will engage people on a website, you do have a Facebook, you do have an Instagram, you can put it on the ticketing requirement, etc., so that when people get to the front door, they well and truly know that they had to be vaccinated to be there. It's one of the issues that came up in the trials in regional Victoria in a cinema. They had to turn people away because they weren't double vaccinated. But at this point in time, they can just go to another cinema. But also the show's probably on again, where that's not the case with lots of our touring artists. It's a one night only opportunity. So we are working through government on what we can provide to, support people to implement their mandates. Again, just clarifying, not Music Victoria's position, it's the law. So we're just passing on that information. No dancing. Yep, that's the rules. Don't draw attention to it. Let's try and get open safely.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you'd like to submit any more questions, you can email info@musicvictoria.com.au. We're sending that into the chat right now. or alternatively, you can still submit your questions to the Google form link that I'll send through as well just now, and we can get to them as soon as possible. Big thank you. Can we get a big round of applause for Simone for all of her wealth of information? She's amazing. She's doing so much hard work for all of us. Let's give it up for Simone. Thank you very much. She is just a fantastic person. Thank you very much.
Yes, you have to. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments still.
Yeah.
Yes, we have to be patient, but I also know you've been really patient for a really long time. So I totally get that your patience is wearing thin, and this is where adding your voice to the arguments that we're having. I do think we're close to the end. Lord, I hope we are. Don't know how much more we can do, but I think if we can add our voice, that's the last kind of push we need to get it across the line to the end goal. But yeah, understand that your patience is wearing thin. So let's go hard. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much for everyone for joining us today. My name's Kiwat. This is Simone. We've been Music Victoria's Where To Now. Thank you very much from all of us from here, and we'll see you guys in the future. Thank you very much. All right. Bye. Have a great afternoon.